The topic today is interactive journalism and immersive media. This is one of 6 such modules I'll be doing with you. With all of these, we'll try and keep it very rooted to practice. We will have an assignment. It's pretty long-winded, but it doesn't need to be. In fact, it's much more like what we experience every day. And in fact, the best journalism is one where the journalist isn't so visible. You're inside the story. You're surrounded by what happens to experience through the journalist's eyes and ears. We live in an age where the mobile phone, the iPhone, iPad, whatever, are such an integral part of our lives. The reason they are is not because they can do so much, they can achieve so much, but because they're easy to use. And I think that is really what we want to strive at. And I will start with a very personal experience. This is an image of my sister. She's a retired doctor, very technically proficient in other ways, but not really a techie when it comes to mobile phones or IT-like things. She has 3 grandchildren, and that's transformed her life. I think it was 2008 when a new device called the Flip came in. It was a simple video camera, 720 pixels. Pretty much you press a button and it did the rest, a video version of the old Kodak Brownie. And I gave a copy to my sister. The beauty of the Flip is the fact that it's very easy to use, but also very easy to upload the pictures from it. So my sister would go around taking pictures mostly of her grandkids, and then it had like a USB stick, and you stuck it onto the camera, and then the camera did the rest. It uploaded it onto a special website, and you could then do all the things, well, at least most of the things that one does at an editing table, without the pain of learning either coding or programming. And my sister just took to it. She was everywhere. She was the paparazzi. She was taking these pictures of the grandkids, putting them up, putting titles, editing, putting music. She became a video editor. The next picture is of my mother. She is taking a picture of the very famous Mexican photographer, Pedro Maya, completely undaunted by the fact that there is this very famous photographer in front of her. She's the one who's directing things. She's taking pictures. And I think that is part of the beauty of it. This technology now has become so accessible that pretty much everyone can use it. We'll go a little bit further. The next picture is of the police surrounding our gallery. I'd done a show called Crossfire, which is the Bangladeshi euphemism for extrajudicial killings, and the government sent riot police to close down our show. Now, the cameras that you see are by professional photographers. They're surrounding us and the police and myself, and they were in great abundance. But one of the things I did was I interviewed the police who were blocking the entry to our gallery. And I did it using the Flip. It was very deliberate. I mean, the Flip was not as threatening. I wasn't hiding it, but I had it with me, and the police didn't really care very much about it. And as I interviewed them, something very interesting happened. I had been given death threats before, and there was this person coming up, not realizing who I was, making death threats to the photographer. And I'm filming this person in the presence of the police. And I've been able to show this work later on at Tate Modern and other places. And it's incredible that I have this material. And the only reason I have it is because I was using something as simple as the Flip. Interestingly, at the time, this is 2010, the professionals were using digital beta. which in Bangladesh would have cost over $60,000. The flip cost $75, well, $70, and I got a special deal, buy one, get one free, because I gave one to my sister. So effectively, with a $35 camera, I was doing the equivalent of what this $60,000 camera would do. They both shot 720 pixels. But let's move on. Let's actually look at the history of the printing press, the history of media as such, how things have moved from so quickly. From the 1400s, when the printing press came up, there was something very interesting at that time. The people who ran the press were the journalists themselves. These were publishers. They were journalists, they were publishers, they were printers, and they took to printing because they had a message to give out, and this was the way in which they were doing it. But of course, what happened was broadcast. It was one person or a group of people saying something to many, and it revolutionized things. It certainly made a huge difference to the world at large, but it was a particular type of media. Let me read something from Greg Picker. This is later, 400 years later, 1825 to 1850, in the newspapers and political expression in colonial Sydney. He's saying, "A nation is governed by all that has tongue in the nation." The voice was recognized as being so powerful, and of course it was and is very powerful. But today it is not just a few people who have voice. Let's move on. I mean, we had the printing press at that time. A significant difference came into being when you had the telegraph, and there it was Morse code, dots and dashes, which were giving messages. But there was one big difference. Not only was it something that could be transmitted through wires, but it was two-way conversation. It was a person giving a message to another person, or at least one point giving a message to another point, and in reverse. So while it wasn't that much more evolved, it did break from that unidirectional mode. About 200 years ago, that's what it was, the telegram. The telephone came, and the telephone led to two-way conversation in real time. And already things were beginning to happen which were very different. But then we had, 150 years ago, recorded media. And 100 years ago, electronic media. There was radio, then there was television. And suddenly broadcast media came about in a very, very different way. But even so, with all those shifts until that point, we really had broadcast. One location sending to many. It was one to many. I'll digress a little bit. I showed you that picture of Pedro Mayer earlier on, my mother taking pictures of Pedro Mayer. Pedro came to Bangladesh for Chobi Mela, the festival of photography that we do. And in his inaugural speech, he said something very interesting. He said, well, most of you think that the internet was discovered in Berkeley in the United States, but I happen to know that the internet was discovered in Bangladesh. And of course, everyone sits up. This is very interesting stuff, revolutionary. And he says, I'm sitting in a rickshaw, and there's this almighty jam, and it looks as if nothing will get anywhere. But pretty soon, every little rickshaw makes its own way and finds its hole and gets to its eventual destination, which is quite an interesting analogy for packet switching, the basis on which the internet was developed. Now, internet was not discovered with the purpose we are using it for at the moment. It was designed as a method whereby if there was a war, if infrastructure had been so badly damaged, you could still communicate, which is how the packet switching came into being. Now, what we have today, though, is this chaos that is the internet. But the chaos is a beautiful chaos, because for now, for once, you have communication that is many to many. Not only do you have one to many, you have many to many, many to one. You have a myriad ways through which people communicate. You will use personal messages, you will broadcast, and we talk to the phone. Today, the telephone itself is a broadcasting device. And every individual who owns a smartphone essentially owns a television company. That person can be broadcasting to the world live in real time, using all the tools that a major television station might have. Of course, I'm not saying they're identical, and developing an audience is complicated, developing credibility is complicated, all the things that have to happen, but that technical possibility is there. And that really has transformed the way in which we see things and do things. So it's no longer a question of someone speaking from a pulpit. It's no longer a question of a sermon being given. It's not the cathedral, it's the bazaar. And there are simultaneously many conversations taking place. And I mean, we've had this before. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, if there was a missing child, there would be a rickshaw going around with a mic, and they would be broadcasting, there's a kid where he was wearing shorts, he's pale, he's of this sort of height, this is his name, if anyone's seen him, please report. This was the way in which we communicated. And that still continues. But that is not the only form. There are multiple ways in which messages get to and from places, and it's quite exciting in that way. There are opinion polls, there are call-ins. It's the person in the street versus Citizen Kane. It's also come about, and one of the reasons it's become so important is because now there is generally a distrust in public media. For valid reasons often. Public media is often owned by political parties, by corporations, by religious zealots, by people who use it more for propaganda than for the public good. And often, of course, they massage the truth in the process. The fact that people have a chance to question that also makes a difference. There was an interesting thing that was happening in the early days of Wi-Fi. There was a corporate person called Joe Nacchio, and he was giving a sad story to shareholders and the media, talking about how the company was in so much trouble and he himself was in financial trouble and whatever else. But of course the people in the audience had Wi-Fi, they were able to fact check in real time, and they were able to find out that this same person who was giving us this woeful story had sold a lot of stock and made a lot of money while he was telling everyone else to accept the fact that they would be losing money. And they were able to confront Joe Nacchio with those questions. That is something that was not possible before. When someone said something, there might well have been an opportunity to check it later on and come back or whatever, but in real time, at that point, to be able to question a person, to say, no, that's not the way it was. We know, here we have evidence. And that really changed things. And today you have bloggers who get accreditation, who can be on presidential beats and things like that, so things have changed. In our own country, the analog form was also one way in which the people could participate. We had things like the wall newspaper. While newspapers are cheap in relative terms, they're still expensive for many people. And it's been a practice for many years that once a newspaper comes out, on a public wall somewhere, it's pasted up and people gather around and they will read. Sometimes even people who cannot read are there and someone will read out for them. So it's a very public sort of engagement, and it changes the interactions that we talk about. But let's move on. In Korea, you had Oh My News, which became popular. It was commercially successful. And their motto was, every citizen is a reporter. And that is the truth today. Each one of us is potentially a reporter. And we can consume news, but we can also transmit news. We can be live, we can be witnesses. We are the person on the ground who can be reporting at a time when an event of magnitude has happened, when the media is not there, when the police are not there, when the broadcast channels are not there. You or I, as an individual, can be that person, can be that point source of news. The other things are about credibility. The reality is, and I mentioned earlier the fact that public media is no longer trusted so much. What is trusted is word of mouth. You trust someone whom you know. If your friend tells you something and your friend says, I was there, I saw it with my own eyes, you will believe it because it's your friend, it's a trusted source. And that, for individuals, people around them, people they know, people they've empathized with, people they've known for a long time, are people they will be far more likely to believe than a major corporation far away. Though that is also true. I mean, the major corporations do have credibility, they have a track record, and they're meant to be people who have verified and validated and are giving you news as it happens, though that's not always the case. Now, if we talk about when we began internet in Bangladesh, well, even before that, when we had email in Bangladesh, we didn't have internet. We had electronic bulletin boards. And that was the way through which virtual communities built up. They shared information that they found useful within the community. SMS became very important. In the Philippines, it was able to lead to coups and revolutions. I talked about South Korea and Oh My News. But essentially what we have today is the largest increase in expressive ability in human history. Today, each one of us is an author. Each one of us is a journalist. Each one of us is a storyteller. And we do have important, heart-rending, emotive stories to tell. And there might well be a situation where a young child with a mobile phone can come up with a story that will go viral, that the whole world will respond to, that will gather a greater listening community than a major channel might have. Though that doesn't happen often. I mean, we'll be kidding ourselves if we think that each one of us has the capability of challenging a major channel. But it is no longer a question of just David versus Goliath. There are differences in power structures, and those are the differences we need to be able to utilize. So we have social media. And social media, of course, is something that all of us uses, all generations today use, though some use it more than others. And they all have different characteristics. We are photographers, and we're in an advantageous position because the photograph is what really increases engagement more than anything else, the photograph and the video. And people recognize that. So even people who are not photographers, are not videographers, will find a picture or a small video clip and they will use it for their messages. In a sense, the way we are doing. Of course, what we are also doing is dealing with COVID. We're dealing with a situation where you can no longer sit with me in the classroom. So these virtual tools become that much more important. We have weblogs, we have chat rooms, we have message boards, we have wikis, we have mobile computing. But I will take you back to photography in its traditional way. I mean, you will know of Eugene Smith, the great documentary photographer in the United States. His lifetime passion was the story he did on Pittsburgh, on the community in Pittsburgh. And many magazines, including Life magazine, was interested in publishing, and they were going to pay him a lot. This is many, many years ago, and 1959, 1960, they were prepared to pay him $20,000 for a story, which was a huge amount of money. But Billie Jean Smith wasn't willing to give that story because he felt that they were not going to treat his story right. He was passionate about that story. He wanted to be told well. And eventually went with popular photography, which gave him 38 pages. That's what he wanted. He wanted that space. He wanted to be used well. He wanted to be published well. He wanted editorial control. That you do not have in mainstream media. But with social media, when you're publishing yourself, you have that control. So while Billie Jean Smith at that time had to make very hard decisions, today you and I can decide, yes, I will have 38 pages. I will have a long form piece of journalism. I will do it in this way. This is what my edit will be. This is what I'll include. That's what I'll exclude. It is my story for me to tell. And that takes us into a very, very different space. I will move from there to a very practical situation, something that I myself was involved with, that happened, that is of great significance to Bangladesh. On the 29th of July 2018, two young school children, Rajib and Mim, were mowed down by a speeding bus. They were killed. 11 other students were injured. The students obviously were very, very angry. They took to the streets in protest because they had talked a long time before about road safety and no one had cared. And enough when it was enough, they felt. So they took to the streets and they did something remarkable. They took over the streets and began to manage the streets in a way that the police, the administration had never been able to do. And they screamed for justice. As a journalist, I was taking pictures. So I documented the movement, but then something else happened when the government could control it anymore, and it was getting to be an embarrassment for them because the kids were showing them up. They were running the streets efficiently, smoothly. There was no bribery. VIP cars were being stopped and ambulances let through. Police vehicles without driving licenses and fitness certificates were being stopped. Ministers being stopped. This had never happened in this country before. And suddenly this government felt this cannot be allowed to go on because it shows the government for its weaknesses and its faults. So the government sent out their armed thugs to beat up the students. Of course, I as a journalist had to photograph this. I was documenting this. I was giving live feeds. Then they turned on me. I was attacked. I was roughed up. My equipment smashed. That was on the 4th of August. On the 5th of August, I continued giving live feeds, mostly on Facebook. And I also gave a little interview on Al Jazeera channel. That night, the security forces came into our flat. I was uploading pictures. I was on my own. I got picked up. I was handcuffed. I was blindfolded, taken away. I later got tortured and spent 107 days in detention. Now I say this because why do you think one person making giving out some Facebook live feeds would be considered so dangerous for the government? You know, there were these major channels, they were newspapers who had far bigger circulation than I did. Well, two things really. The corporations have a fear of their licenses being stopped, their revenue being stopped. They're much more circumspect. They practice self-censorship to a far greater extent. I was taking a risk they were not prepared to take. I was saying things they were not prepared to say. So that was one. The other was one individual who has followers with the right tools, giving the right message, can send out a message that can go viral, that can go worldwide, and of course that's what happened. My feeds were being circulated by everyone. It created a huge buzz. It was something the government could not control. And therefore they felt it was a threat. They had to clamp down. And I was on the receiving end of it. But I say this because this is a tool. I had no tool more than any of you will have. A mobile phone, maybe a small video camera, and internet. The combination of that is so very powerful for each one of us, that we can be powerful, we can be effective, we can be a threat, and it can also be a danger to us. That's about as much as I'm going to go into for the moment, but what I want to leave you with is, before I talk about artificial intelligence and what that can do and how that changes things, and that will be material for a later class, but I'd like you to do something. I'd like you to go out with those very same tools, a mobile phone, internet. Think not only of what you can do, but what you can mobilize, how you can gather people around you, how you can build a community, and how you can, in some ways, impact society in a meaningful way with those very limited tools. I want you to design the project. I want to look at what your role is within it, what the role of the others might be, what the impediments might be, and how you might overcome them. It's very open-ended. There is no one answer, and you will have to find an answer that's right for you. It might be a coming election. It might be something that's happening in your village. It might be something that's unreported that you want to report about. It might be something joyous. The choice is yours. But I would like you to become that broadcast machinery and come back to us with what you have achieved through that broadcast. I look forward to the next class. Bye for now.